Here now is another brief excerpt from John Burroughs' 1988 Hypnosis, in which he joins Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt's investigation in Rendlesham Forest after midnight, December 28th. With Lieutenant Colonel Halt are several men, including Airman First Class Chris Arnold and Airman Bartholomew, who are mentioned. This is John's second encounter with the lights, and he begins listening to Colonel Halt.
I go to Colonel Halt. It's back again. I can't believe it. He acted like he wasn't surprised. He was real calm. But the other people were scared. They looked weird. They looked very surprised and very, very upset. Colonel Halt and I were standing there. Arnold and I were standing there, and he was good friends with Colonel Halt. Well, what happened, Colonel? Weird thing. He goes, weird thing. He goes, we had things over us, on top of us. They were making contact with their minds. I looked at him, what are you talking about? They're little blue lights. The craft was still hovering out there. He goes, they're coming from that craft. They've been out there for hours. And I go, well, I want to get closer. And he says, okay. He goes, you can come with me, but Chris, I want you, Bartholomew, to stay here. Hit the light off the truck. And he goes, John, I want you to go out there because I think you can bring this closer. What do you mean?
Who told you that?
Colonel Halt. I think you can bring this ship and these things closer. They want you to do it. And I'm like,
who wants you to do it? Colonel Halt.
Colonel Halt said they did. That's all he said was that.
Does he appear to have some knowledge or some understanding that you don't understand?
I didn't understand what was going on.
Okay.
I was
to know something that you didn't.
He seemed to be very at peace of mind and very calm, and like he goes, this is the most bizarrest, weirdest experience. People will never believe it.
Do you know why they thought you could bring it closer?
No, I didn't understand. And that was something that I never understood either. They wanted me there, and they wanted me there in stages. Like, you could stay in this area for a while. They weren't surprised that I was there either. They were not surprised. The people that saw me come out there were surprised, but Colonel Halt was not surprised. And they kept me in stages. They kept me waiting, like, wait him here, wait him there, and now it's okay.
What happened then?
Well, then he put his arm around me and he said, let's go. And then there was all of a sudden there was this short buck sergeant, and he was Mexican. And he was there. He appeared coming up, like coming towards me. Like he wasn't with the main group. He was like coming up towards me. And he says, let's go. And three of us walked towards the craft. And Colonel Halt goes, I've got all this on tape recording. And he shows me the tape recorder. And he has a radio with him too, his radio. And he goes, and I'm recording all this through the wing command post. He goes, I'm going to keep all this stuff because it's going to be worse. And he goes, let's go. So we started walking. And the light was there, and it was in the distance. And we walked a little bit farther. And then, there it was. 3 blue lights. He goes, there they are. I go, yeah, there they are. And he goes, that's what we had before. And he goes, John, you're never going to believe this, but there are a group of us, they made contact with us. They were on top of us. It was like they spoke to us. I go, they? What's they? And he goes, these lights. I go, you mean you saw something? He goes, these lights. He goes, there were lights there, and they were speaking to us. They were over us. They were flying in the sky. They were hovering over us. They were doing all kinds of things.
Now, John, hold it right there where you can see those blue lights. Now, I want you to look at one of those lights and ask the question that comes to your mind. And that light will talk back to you. Tell me what it says.
come to me.
Okay, now, what do you do?
They started moving, and we all froze. And they were up and down.
You mean the lights?
Yeah,
Okay,
they split up. They split up.
Okay, now ask them what they represent. That's that light, what it's representing.
The craft.
Okay. Now, is there any life form in or with that craft?
That was the life form.
The light is the life form. John felt the lights themselves were intelligent entities that could also explain what happened when Airman John Burroughs and Sergeant Adrian Bustinza were running next to each other toward the red and white lights in the farmer's field. That's when Adrian fell to the ground on John's right, and John only remembers getting close to red-orange lights, and he does not remember anything else. Later, Adrian told Burroughs, quote, "The light forced me to the ground, and I saw the red-orange light come over you," close quote. Was John Burroughs abducted twice? After midnight on December 26th, and again on December 28th by these peculiar lights? John is still haunted by what happened to him in Rendlesham Forest, December 26th and December 28th, 1980. He is especially troubled by the fact that he cannot consciously remember what happened when he was close to the lights both nights. John still has strange dreams, cannot sleep well, and feels like something in his mind wants to come out. In 2008, John Burroughs contacted me about his anxieties and said he wondered if I could find a qualified hypnotherapist who could try to penetrate the block on his memory. Phoenix clinical hypnotherapist Melinda Vale works with post-traumatic shock cases with young people and agreed to help. I hoped that John could break through to full memory. Here are brief highlights from the October 2008 hypnosis. John is drawn to mysterious lights that seem to be communicating telepathically and that had what looked like a blinking eye reminiscent of what Sergeant Monroe Nevels and Colonel Halt also described seeing in the forest.
And you're outside, aren't you?
Whoa!
It's all right, sweetheart. What is it?
Oh, there was like 20 of them.
Okay, it's all right. It's all right. Tell me about them.
Oh,
I've
they
got
just
you.
they just were there.
I've got you.
As soon as
I've got you. Tell me about them.
oh no.
It's all right. It's all right. I've got you. I've got you. Tell me about them.
They're just there.
Okay, what are they?
Whenever I don't know.
Okay, what do
The
they
milky surface is there, and then they're there behind it.
Okay, what do they look like?
Little specks of blue lights.
Okay. What do they mean?
I don't know. Oh God.
What?
It won't let me.
It won't let you go back there?
It every time I go, it gets strong. Oh. And it wants to pull me towards it.
Okay, sweetheart.
And when I think it comes towards me, and then it pulls me towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's wrong.
Okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Oh. What are they?
It's all right.
Are they coming at me?
It's lights that are coming at you?
Little ones.
Little ones, okay. What does it feel like when they come at you?
It just startles me.
Okay.
Oh God.
You're all right. I've got you. What else do you see there?
Just a huge. Now it's getting bigger and bigger, like milky white object or substance that just keeps going up, down, wider, smaller. Then there's an eye or something behind it.
And it's interfering with your ability to go back in time?
Every time you ask me to go back, the smaller objects or the thing appear and it gets stronger. Now there's a hole between it, like a hole's opening up.
Uh-huh. Do you see anything in the hole?
No. Wow.
What does the hole mean to you?
I don't know.
Whatever happened to John Burroughs on December 26th and 28th, an unidentified aerial craft hovered stationary over this hot row of stored nuclear weapons at the RAF Bentwaters Weapons Storage Area, also known as the WSA. Those nuke bunkers were watched around the clock by security from the WSA Alarm Station Watchtower. The Delta Flight Security Chief in the Bentwaters Tower the night of December 27th to 28th was Sergeant Rick Bobo. The tower was 50 feet above the ground to give a clear 360-degree view. Sergeant Bobo's priority was to report any threat to the WSA. That night, he watched a large reddish-blue light in the sky that hovered stationary for nearly 2 hours, and also periodically emitted smaller white lights that sped rapidly down into Rendlesham Forest. At least twice, Sergeant Bobo phoned Central Security Control, and in each call, he was told the situation was under control because there was an investigation in the forest. That was Colonel Halt's group. Rick Bobo returned from the Air Force to work in the Indiana Department of Transportation, the state in which he was born and raised. I talked with Rick in a recorded phone interview for radio about what he saw and heard during his D-Flight security shift in the Bentwaters WSA Tower after midnight on December 28, 1980.
It looked really big, and there was red and blue. And I did see something come down from it and went down into the woods.
And how long were you able to see that reddish-blue large light?
Oh, goodness. It was there a long time. It just sat there. It didn't go anywhere. It just sat in one spot. I think you could have put a crosshair on it and it never would have moved.
Wow.
Never wavered.
So Sergeant Rick Bobo, up in the WSA Watchtower, remembers hearing John Burroughs' voice on the radio when Colonel Halt was in the forest with all the men and equipment and insists no beams came down into the Bentwaters WSA. But he did see with his own eyes small white lights leave the large glowing red and blue object in the sky and head straight down for Rendlesham Forest. Finally, after 30 years, retired Colonel Charles Halt, the former RAF Bentwaters Deputy Base Commander, went on the record in a June 25, 2009 press release to state,
I wish to make it perfectly clear that UFOs I saw were structured machines moving under intelligent control and were operating beyond the realm of anything I've ever seen before or since. I believe the objects I saw at close quarter were extraterrestrial in origin, and that the security services of both the United States and England were and have been complicit in trying to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham by use of well-practiced methods of disinformation.
Right from the beginning, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston saw what they could not explain, and something happened to their minds, either in the forest, in military interrogations later on, or both. The results have been blank or confused memories. The two men were right next to each other in the forest, but they do not remember the same details.
On July 3rd, 1947, 22 months and 17 days after the first unidentified flying object came down in the vicinity of Los Alamos nuclear power plant, very close to San Antonio, New Mexico, reports were received that a second ship of unknown origin had also fallen to Earth.
Unlike the San Antonio case, where only 4 or 5 people were direct witnesses of the incident, in the case of Roswell, there were at least 150 individual eyewitnesses and more than 600 indirect witnesses. In Roswell, before being able to conceal the information, it had already transcended to a high level of attention in the media. Most everyone had heard about the strange alien crashes on July 9, 1947. In the name of security, a disinformation and falsehood campaign on the extraterrestrial phenomenon claimed that lives had been lost and careers ruined. The extraterrestrial phenomenon was in the headlines, and people were concerned it would be a national security threat for America. On July 8th of 1947, the Roswell Daily Record published the news that in the vicinity of their town, the Air Force had recovered a ship that fell from space.
The ship found in Roswell, New Mexico, was the first one recovered by the Air Force. The ship that was found in San Antonio was recovered by the Navy or the United States Army. Perhaps for this reason, there was no extensive communication between both authorities. Perhaps because of this, the news of ship crashes came to light. However, our investigation would show that there were other plans, that there was a real conspiracy.
In Roswell, New Mexico, 2 flying ships were recovered, as well as 5 or 6 alien being corpses. One of the ships that was found had little damage, while the other ship exploded after crashing to the earth in fiery flames. 2 dead bodies were recovered that were not heavily damaged, and 2 other bodies suffered considerable injuries. But most profound was the being that was still alive. It was thought that the reason these ships fell to the ground was due to a bad storm. However, according to the Guy Hotel memorandum that was addressed to J. Edgar Hoover in March of 1950, Air Force personnel thought that the ships had fallen as a result of strong radars that had interfered with their navigation system. This opinion was stated in the memorandum, but had been discredited by the FBI, even though all the information presented in the documents was confirmed as accurate evidence. It is a fact that the ships fell to the earth in New Mexico, that they crashed because of high-frequency microwave radars in the area. These radars not only affected the ships of extraterrestrial ships, but American planes that approached them had experienced problems too. Of the 4 ships that fell and were recovered with some damage, 1 more disintegrated completely.
Donald Schmitt and Tom Corey are the researchers who have investigated extensively into the history of Roswell. Their research, that took more than 30 years, is a historical record of what happened there. They have been able to interview more than 600 indirect witnesses and 150 direct witnesses of what happened. Thanks to them, this research instigated our nuevo team to visit Roswell, New Mexico, and examine all the details and make our own findings known.
Este es el lugar donde en 1947 un ranchero, Mac Brazel, descubrió los restos de un objeto desconocido, algo que se habría estrellado en la noche del 3 de julio de 1947. Él llegó temprano en la mañana y para su sorpresa, prácticamente a 1 milla a la redonda, existían los restos de un objeto que habría explotado en el cielo.
This is the very site that Mac Brazel, we believe the early morning of July 4th, after a severe lightning storm, came upon this area and discovered just this massive area of unusual, extraordinary debris.
Thanks to Donald Schmitt, the key investigator on the Roswell case, they were in the same place where Mac Brazel found remains of an equally amazing debris field from the crash.
As long as he was only dealing with material here, he was making every effort. He was going into the nearest town of Corona. He went to his nearest neighbor, Floyd and Loretta Proctor, about 10 miles from here.
So, Mac Brazel traveled 10 miles, about 16 kilometers, with a sample of the ship's material that was unknown to him. Mac thought that his closest neighbors might be able to help him understand what he saw.
And at the time in 47, he didn't have a television, no radio, no telephone. So he had no way of knowing that there were a lot of sightings going on. He didn't even know about the flying saucers. But one by one, they were all telling him it could be one of those flying discs they're talking about. And he still had no idea what they were really, describing.
Alien material from an airship that nobody had seen before. And according to Donald Schmitt, even 64 years later, this material is still not fully understood.
No one could recognize it, no one could identify the material, and everyone described the material as being way beyond any of our technology at that time, and even by today's standards. Memory material, for example, that right before your eyes, paper thin, that you could not cut, you couldn't burn, and yet you could crumble it, you could crease it, you could fold it up, and you'd lay it down and it would flow like water, which is smooth right out. Well, we don't even have such material by today's standards, and yet this was in '47. And that's one of the things that the skeptics never take into account, that all of the witnesses are describing materials that defy conventional explanation. And this is where it all happened. This is where that material was all scattered. And we will be back here, once again, searching and hoping to find that needle in a haystack, because as you see, we have done nothing to create a tourist attraction. We've kept our word to the ranch owner that it remains private. We have not commercialized it, and we plan on coming back and actually having our fourth archaeological dig.
De tal manera que hoy es un sitio histórico y sin embargo ha sido mantenido exactamente como estaba, totalmente pristino. No hay ninguna señal aquí. No se puede llegar si un experto, un guía, no lo trae a uno hasta este sitio. Y por eso sigue siendo tan especial. Las investigaciones se han realizado aquí, pero van a continuar. Se van a hacer nuevas excavaciones en busca de ese pequeño metal, de ese objeto que demostraría la autenticidad de toda esta historia. Then we have 3 sites and 2 events. First event is an explosion. Fails close to here, right? And you call that the debris field.
Debris field, correct.
And for some reason, 2 of the bodies end up here.
And then a pod or a capsule of some sort, about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, continue along this same trajectory, east-southeast, and come down much closer to Roswell.
64 years later, we were in the same place where Mac Brazel discovered the alien ship debris that would have spread after the impact. Then just 2 days later, Mr. Brazel found a new crash site. However, he didn't find any parts of the craft there, but did find some alien corpses. What he saw and discovered there affected his life forever. The smell, the dead bodies, an impression that would never leave him.
I'm sure that after he found the remains, that's when he realized, this was something that, and it really shook him to the core, because he kept describing, even afterwards, that as he mentioned in the presence of his granddaughter, that you didn't want to see what I saw out there. You didn't want to be there, because it just, again, it was something that affected him for the rest of his life.
It was right there that Mac Brazel, accompanied by Timothy D. Proctor, the son of one of his neighbors, found remains of beings that were not of this planet. Timothy took years to reveal the story.
When his mother, Loretta, was about to have some surgery that was very serious, her son stopped by the ranch house one particular day and said, "Mom, I'd like to show you something." And they got in his pickup truck and he drove her out into this area, and they didn't go to the debris field site. They came atop this ridge, atop this bluff. And they stepped out, and all he would say was, "Mom, this is where Mac found something else." There is another boy with Brazel at the time. His name is Sidney Jack, they called him, Wright. And he admitted that he was with Brazel when they found the bodies a couple of miles, as he put it, from the debris field.
One further testimony supports this story. Mac Brazel was interviewed by Frank Joyce on a radio show. Even in his retirement, Mr. Brazel revealed additional information about what happened in 1947.
He was talking to Brazel, and Brazel kept talking about it was just horrible. It was just horrible. And Joyce kept asking him, well, what are you talking about? And it was horrible, Brazel kept going on. And Joyce would say, are you suggesting there was something else? And Joyce then said, well, are you talking about bodies? And Brazel kept going on. You wouldn't believe the smell. The stench was terrible. And Joyce suggested, well, you know, they're launching those rockets over at White Sands. Maybe they've launched a monkey. And Brazel fired back, they weren't any damn monkeys. They weren't human. So,
and they were here?
And
they were found here? That's where we are?
This is where we are, yes.
What happened to the bodies? What did the authorities do with them? A ship crashed on the property of the Foster Ranch on July 4th, 1947. There, Mac Brazel discovered the remains of the alien saucer. The previous night, there had been a strong storm, and some considered that the ship had been hit by lightning and had fallen to Earth. Mac grabbed a few pieces of the ship and took them to Roswell to deliver them to the authorities. That was July 5th, 1947.
That is where Brazel, the first evening after he discovered the debris, he went back with his pickup truck and he either loaded it into the box or dragged it, the largest piece.
On the morning of Sunday, July 6, 1947, Mac Brazel went to Roswell to notify the authorities of what he had found. Once there, he went to see the local sheriff, Sheriff George Wilcox, who in turn gave notice to the military authorities of the Roswell Air Base in New Mexico that strange remains of an aircraft had been discovered on Mr. Brazel's property. Colonel William Blanchard sent 2 military intelligence officers to investigate and recover any strange objects that had been scattered in the field. They arrived at this small shelter on July 6, 1947, in the evening.
We're standing in front of the old ranch house. It was called, still is, the Hines House. And this is where, when Mac Brazel led the 2 intelligence officers, Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cabot, out to investigate the debris field.
Commander Jesse Marcel, head of intelligence for the 509th Bombers Group in Roswell, brought some of the materials back to his base for inspection.
And the very night that Marcel would return back from the debris field with his 42 Buick convertible full of debris, full of wreckage, the back seat, the trunk, he would wake his son, Jess Jr. and wife up, take them into the kitchen. And there he had wreckage. He had debris scattered all over the kitchen floor. Wanted them to see it before he took it all the way to the base. And it was there that Jesse Jr., examining one of the pieces, noticed some of the hieroglyphic-like symbology. And immediately, observed that, noticed that this was something that his father, had never seen anything like this before. And his father kept talking about pieces of a flying saucer, flying saucer craft.
Another serviceman, Colonel William Blanchard, Commander-in-Chief of the Roswell Military Base, was also a witness. Years later, his daughter would reveal what happened that night in 1947 in his house, where the Blanchard family lived.
Blanchard's daughter, Dale, describes that when her father came home late that night, that first night, that he was beside himself, that he, for being a big man, he played football, And there were little people, there were little men, and they weren't from here. And then he would say that they weren't from this earth. So the family described how when Blanchard came home, that this was something very unsettling, something that again defied conventional explanation.
Y muy pronto llegaría aquí el ejército de los Estados Unidos para recoger hasta la más pequeña pieza de lo que existía en este lugar.
This is the area that the military then would come to and spend about 3 days, 50 to 60 men, on hands and knees, shoulder to shoulder, picking up every last piece. As one of the MPs said to us, they were told, if it doesn't move, pick it up. And so there were trucks, and they would take sacks over their shoulders full of the material.
Why they had to pick every single piece?
Because they realized they had something extraordinary. It was something beyond their comprehension, and they wanted to make sure that they had every possible piece. Not only that any outside people would possibly discover, like us, but at that time, there were a lot of Soviet spies, especially given that the first atomic bomb was detonated just to the west of here. And so as a result, they were also making sure that none of it fell into enemy hands.
Everything that was recovered at the crash site, all the parts and bodies, were transferred by the United States Army to the P-3 hangar of Building 84, which in 1947 was known as the Black Hangar.
This is where we taxied the aircraft to load up certain cargo. This is where it all happened, this very hangar. This is where they took the remains of the ship and the bodies that were recovered north of Roswell in July of 1947.
In this hangar, where the atomic bomber planes from the Second World War were kept, bodies of alien beings were stored and examined. Bodies unlike any humans ever seen before. All the witnesses interviewed by Donald Schmitt and his research team were also there to be interviewed. They all claimed and supported the same story, that this case was authentic, it really happened. Truths that have been hidden for more than 60 years.
They saw two that were obviously dead and one that was alive and walking and talking.
He said that he went out and found that when they got there that he observed the crash site, a circular type ship crash site, and there was debris strewn everywhere, and that he had found 3 bodies. They had large heads on them, and at least one of them was still alive when they brought them back to the base.
He said, it happened. I was out there, I saw the crash site, I saw the spacecraft, and I saw the grays. And the grays was in reference to the color of the skin.
And some describe, for example, not only seeing areas where bodies were laid out with a canvas tarpaulin covering everything but the heads, but then off to the side, others would describe seeing an egg-shaped object, a pod, a capsule, about the size of a car. And then others would describe seeing areas of nothing but wreckage scattered, because they were actually attempting to reassemble, almost like a crash investigation, portions of this unknown object.
The materials classified in this hangar were moved to Fort Worth, Texas, on a flight that left this operations center.
In 1947, the very first flight that transported actual wreckage from the crash site came through this building, through this operations building. And that would have been Major Jesse Marcel, and the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, was observed in this building as the men escorted in boxes, open boxes, actual replica as far as remnants from the crash, and came through a hallway, and there was a B-29 that taxied up, which was called Dave's Dream.
the bodies of the alien beings were moved to the restricted area. Joseph Montoya, the vice governor of New Mexico, observed these amazing beings recovered by the United States Army.
Was beside himself. He was distraught. He was upset. And all at once he went, "They weren't human. They weren't human. You won't believe it. You won't believe it." And then later he would describe that he was taken into the hangar and he was shown what he thought were children. And he heard one of them moaning, and its leg was rocking, its knee rocking back and forth. It was alive. And he saw that it wasn't human. And he became immediately upset and, "Get me out of here, get me away from here right away." And that's when he called for his friends to pick him up. And he would always warn them afterwards, "If you ever repeat what I've told you, I will say you're a liar. I will say you're lying." And he would also warn them that I can't stop the FBI, I can't stop the government from hurting you. So he warned them never to talk about this again. So it was after he had passed away that they finally started to confide to us and repeat what he had originally told them, that they weren't human.
Today, thanks to witnesses who saw what happened in the hangar, as well as in the hospital, and the transferring of those bodies to the Wright-Patterson military base, we know what really happened. The witnesses decided to speak before they died and leave their testimony for the history books.
One of our first 10 witnesses, Eli Benjamin, who we describe in our book, Witness to Roswell, described how they were called and assigned to guard duty over at the hangar, Building 84. And then they were instructed to escort in ambulance trucks a number of gurneys transporting a number of bodies to this very location. It was there, as they were unloading, most likely from this area right here, that one of the MPs stepped on one of the sheets, pulling it away from one of the bodies on one of the gurneys, and it moved, and the eyes opened. And he saw that clearly, it wasn't human, that it was something, as he describes to this day, haunts him. He gets very emotional when he talks about it because he can't forget the face, and that clearly it was something beyond this planet, beyond our existence here.
Were these creatures hurt?
Some were described even at the crash site as being burned, as being mangled. Some were described as uninjured, almost peaceful, as in repose, as though, they were very serene even in dying. And the surviving one was described at some point even walking on its own or being brought in on a gurney. And then as the base administrator who worked in the hospital, his private secretary, Miriam Bush, described that when she was taken into an examination room here at this hospital facility, she was shocked. She thought they were children, again based on the size of the outline under the sheets on the gurneys. And then she saw one of them move, and she saw again the larger head and the larger eyes, and it was something that affected her as well for the rest of her life.
From the military hospital, telephone calls were made to the only funeral home in Roswell, the Ballard Funeral Home, a call that was made 64 years ago. Glenn Dennis took the call but did not understand the unusual requests made by the Army.
And Glenn's story was that at first the calls were as to the availability of child-sized caskets. Do you have any children's caskets? Okay, if that was believable. But then there were follow-up calls as to what type of chemicals could be used for the preservation of bodily tissue and bodily fluids.
On the next call, other requests were made, and Glenn Dennis was asked to personally visit the military hospital.
And that's when Glenn, entering the back of the hospital, encountered the nurse who warned him to quickly get out of there, that something had happened, that he shouldn't be there. And that's when he was accosted by the military, and that's when they made the comment to him about they'd be digging his bones out of the sand if he didn't keep his mouth shut about it.
Donald Schmitt, the key investigator in the Roswell case, believes that some preliminary examinations were done at the funeral home and at the military hospital. It was found the autopsies were performed at other military facilities too. This would be the first time that the armed forces of the United States had recovered bodies of intelligent, non-human alien beings, bodies that had been recovered in San Antonio from the crashed ships. Now they had irrefutable evidence in their possession that showed the presence of beings of unknown origin. For some, it was evident that the United States was in grave danger. The news had to be stopped and controlled, kept in the strictest secrecy, or otherwise it would cause national panic.
Colonel John Alexander, our next guest here on Beyond Belief for years. He is an expert on UFOs, remote viewing, after-death experiences, and it's my pleasure to welcome John Alexander to Beyond Belief. John, it's always a pleasure seeing you.
Thank you, George.
How have you been?
Pretty good.
We're going to talk about a lot of things with you today, but UFOs on the top of my list with you. When you were studying UFOs and investigating them, and you still are, did you ever come across anything that we really need to know about?
Well, as you know, the first line of my UFO book, UFOs are real. I think the first thing you need to know is absolutely real.
How come we don't have that hard evidence? We've got witness testimony, but we just don't have that hard evidence.
Well, I'd ask how you describe hard evidence. I mean, if you take cases like Bentwaters, for instance, I mean, there's one where you have radiation, you've got the pods, casts, of something physically on the ground. The video evidence that comes in now, people say, where is it? Well, hell, it's coming in basically weekly.
John, it's obvious that they are under some kind of intelligent control. Wouldn't you think?
Some of them certainly seem to be, and they seem to respond, when they interact with things. You've had any number of cases, for instance, where pilots have intercepted them. We've made the mistake, I think, of shooting at them periodically.
Not smart.
You hear Milton Torres case, the great one over the UK. He flies in, he goes to ripple his missiles, and in 2 seconds, the UFO that was at a hover has gone outside the radar range of 250 miles, and I don't know how fast you can calculate that, but that's pretty damn fast.
That is pretty fast. Interesting take on all of that. People have, in some cases, reported seeing little occupants in some of these craft as well. Are they robots? Are they humanoids? What are they?
Well, again, I have no idea. But one of the things I point out is that throughout human history, we have had the reports of interaction between humans and sentient non-human beings. Every culture in the world has described those sorts of things, so that it continues ours. Now, it's fairly recent that we've added, by the way, they came in a UFO, if you will, or flying craft. Before they just appeared, people went into the mountains. You have Rip Van Winkle and these kind of things. And again, not unique. I've spent a lot of time in Hawaii. You talk about the Menehune, the little people who construct things, and you find physical structures that occur after that. I just don't know. Now, if you want to do it, from a practical standpoint, if you were going to go out, and it is what we are doing in space exploration early on, robots make a lot of sense.
Yes, they do.
I mean, if you look at what's happening in warfare, drones, if you will, dirty, dull, and dangerous, you can send those kinds of things out. The price you pay for human exploration and what you have to do from a technological standpoint, the monetary, we value human life, so you've got to have secondary and tertiary, backup systems for survival. The robot, you don't have to worry about that. So that's frankly, if you were a foreign entity or an extraterrestrial entity, in this case, sending things, that would be the practical way to do it.
It would, absolutely. Where might they be coming from? I mean, this is all speculation, but obviously, do you think they're within our solar system? Jacques Vallée, whom you've quoted, believes these are dimensional craft. Yeah. I would like to believe they're coming from other planetary systems in our universe.
Well, the first question, of course, is there sentient life in the universe? And the answer is absolutely, and that's not speculation, that's just pure numbers. The number of, in the recent decades, if you look at the number of inhabitable planets that we're finding, we were guessing 3 decades ago. Now we know that we're out in the hundreds of billions of inhabitable Earth-like planets that are out there, which says there ought to be sentient life someplace out there who would also be doing space exploration and coming here. Jacques and I are actually very close. We did the foreword for my book and the reason on that. And that is, again, you get back to the role of consciousness, that there seems to be some role in here that allows things to appear and disappear. Many of the phenomena that we talk about, this is the case, particularly where things just disappear and appear and whatnot, which suggests a multi-dimensional reality. And there certainly is, again, from a pure scientific perspective, a lot easier to transit the parallel dimensions right here than it is to, have warp speed and be able to do superluminal travel. It would be necessary to do this on a, even within the solar system, let alone intergalactic kinds of travel.
He's one of a kind. He's been at the forefront of investigations for so many years. As you just mentioned, you're a friend of his. Do you have any doubts, John? Any doubts at all that the UFO phenomenon is not real?
Absolutely not. Put that in a positive frame. It is absolutely real.
It is the real deal.
There's no doubt about that.
People are seeing something.
They're
the big
seeing
question
things.
is from
they're
where?
definitely seeing things. They are definitely having interaction with sentient non-human beings. How that comes about and the parameters of it, that's why I keep arguing we need to make it permissible for serious scientists to study this without risking their reputation or livelihood.
Sure.
And we don't do that.
Ben Rich from Lockheed Skunk Works has talked about technologies, but he says that we are so advanced, but it's all in the black ops projects.
Well,
is that true?
Let's be clear. Ben Rich was a friend of mine.
All right.
And most of the things you're describing comes from the extrapolation of a short presentation that somebody heard once. We sat down and discussed this in considerable detail.
You and Ben.
Several times. And quite frankly, he had a shopping list. He said, if this is real, I want the propulsion system, I want this, I want that, do that. Do they have advanced technology? Yes. But one of the things I point to, if you look at the advanced technology, what's the most advanced system that we have right today? And it's probably the F-35. And look at the technological problems we have bringing that.
Oxygen issues with it now.
Bert Rutan was just at the house and we were discussing it. He's a great aviator.
Yeah.
And discussing it, and he goes, that's old technology. You're just kind of kludging things together. I fail to see any big leaps in technology.
What does it want, in your opinion, John? What do they want?
Well, again, here, I'm not sure it's a they or want. What I look at, again, the broader range of phenomenology is it looks like human consciousness is a piece of this. And if you go back in history and you look at what's happened with UFOs, There's a classic case from Jacques Vallée that I use, and it took place in the early 1900s. The guy drives around a mountain in the state of Washington, and he said, here's this UFO hovering there, and I could see every rivet. In early 1900s, that makes sense. Anybody who knew anything about space travel knows no way in hell you'd use rivets. My point here is that it seems to be a step ahead of our consciousness, but not beyond belief. And that as it evolves and our consciousness evolves, there's some kind of interaction that, again, this gets back to terribly, terribly complex.
And there have been some cases where the UFOs have retaliated, haven't they? They've like gobbled up an airplane and the plane's gone now?
If you're talking about the case in Australia, that's one where we just don't know. You have the pilot is flying down to Tasmania and he's interacting with the traffic control saying, I got something flying above me here, and mid-sentence stops and never heard from again. And they did extensive searching, never found a debris field or anything of that nature. You have had, I think, the Iranian case is one of the most fascinating ones, where the fighters go in, they intercept. And what was interesting to me is the pilot said, I was going to, as I got ready to fire, all of a sudden to shut down the panels and whatnot. What was more of interest is if they turned away and became a non-threat, electronics came back up again. As a guy who's worked a lot in electronic warfare, I had the tactical directed energy programs for the Army at the time when I was at ASCO, and I know how to turn you off. What I don't know is how to turn you off and turn you back on again. And that's a capability that would exceed anything that's known even today.
What does that tell you about what these craft could be?
Well, again, I think the problem is that we're talking about them as a single kind of entity sort of thing. When we have a broad range of phenomena, even within the UFOs itself. If you want to extrapolate to the larger scale, I've talked to I came up with a term in a book called the precognitive sentient phenomena. And that has
You coined that phrase.
Yes. And that came from watching Skinwalker Ranch and the events that happened there. But I think it has applicability in this range. And what I meant precognitive, in that case, whatever it is, knew how we were going to respond even before the phenomena were presented. Sentient, it was certainly smart and clearly a phenomena. And this gets to the trickster, if you will. Whatever it was, the precognitive, it was firmly in control. And I think that's what you're seeing in the UFO phenomena as well. Whatever it is in control.
John, thanks for being on Beyond Belief.
Thank you.